So today I'm just going to be freestyling, giving you my thoughts on racial injustice and the entire framework of society in America. Okay, let's get started. So, as we all know, on the 25th of May, let's just start there. The entire world watched the notorious video of a policeman kneed on George Floyd's neck as the man begged for his mother and pleaded for help till he breathed his last breath on this planet. I am far from a social justice warrior, but when we are faced with something as viscerally disgusting as this, we have to speak up. Now, the New Yorker posted an article called "The Death of George Floyd in Context." Now, while this article is interesting, and I'll actually put a link to it down in the bio, there's no debate on this, and there's simply no context that really matters. The context does not matter. The man was subdued, and once a criminal is cuffed, the policeman's responsibility to protect and serve has been accomplished. They have to remember that at the end of the day, they're not judges, they're not the jury, and they sure as hell aren't executioners. Now, one thing I've heard many people say over the past 2-3 months is that he will face retribution in the legal world for a miscarriage of justice. This is referring to the policeman, obviously. Now, to these people I say, this is not a miscarriage of justice. This is cold-blooded murder in broad daylight by a privileged man in power. There is no doubt that if you're a white man living in the United States of America, you have privilege. And what you need to do is use that privilege for the people who don't really have that privilege, unfortunately. So, now let's talk about the solution. Why are cops not holding other cops accountable? That was the first question in my mind when all this was going on, and I actually did some research of my own. And there is this term called the blue shield. Now, what this blue shield is it's a term used in the United States to denote the informal rule among police officers not to report on a colleague's errors, misconduct, or crimes, including police brutality. Now, this blue shield needs to be terminated, and a moral code, a moral shield needs to be put in place. Putting the man behind bars does not solve the problem, although it sets an example. I wonder, did the murder of Aaron Garner, Ahmed Arbery, or Breonna Taylor not set enough an example? Barring the coronavirus situation going on in the United States, the country is now at war with itself. Cops are being stereotypically generalized, and while the country is burning, the President of the United States does not hold any authority. He is selfishly taking action with the end goal of being re-elected again, which I do not see how that's possible for him now. And even during this George Floyd situation, he ordered the National Guard to shoot the, quote, thugs, end quote, rioting on the streets. The American people, as any other people in this world, need a leader, not a man who intentionally inflames violence and transforms a peaceful protest into a riot. I actually heard many people criticizing these protests, saying that they were riots, but what they failed to see is that these were actually peaceful protests, and in a lot of states they were. But the President of the United States felt some need to put out a tweet, as he always does, and inflame this. He was the catalyst to why the peaceful protests turned into riots in the first place. Now think about this for a second. I actually read this somewhere. I'm forgetting where, but this was quite some time back. If you leave your tap on at night and wake up to your sink overflowing, you do not start sweeping the water off the floor, right? You put the tap off first. The tap, in this case, is a flawed justice system. Intensive vetting of cops in the United States is a prerequisite that has sadly been ignored for far too long. Now, let's talk about riots and protests and racism in general, oppressive authority. Let's talk about that for a second, because these riots and protests, it will be there next year, it'll be there the year before that, and it has been here for generations. Now, let's start with the fact about humanity. I read this in Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. He says, we are creatures of emotion, not logic. I'll say that again. We are creatures of emotion, not logic. Now, he uses that to leverage his point about Persuasion. It's an amazing book. I recommend all of y'all read it. But talking about the riots and protests, there has never been a single major social change that wasn't enacted violently. If you don't understand this fact, it is not an opinion, it is a fact. If you do not understand this fact, we cannot engage in civil discourse regarding this topic. The one major problem, especially in the United States of America, is the ignorance in people and their reluctance to have civil discourse. This is with the civilians, with the politicians, and even with the President of the United States and his own cabinet. The rhetoric of violence never solves anything is historically untrue. If you think back, if you look at your history textbooks, whenever an oppressed group has sought to reveal themselves of their oppression of any kind, it has required a physical fight, often as a last resort, but a physical fight is necessary when all other means are useless, are deemed redundant. When the other side is not willing to have civil discourse, to listen, to negotiate, acts of physical violence are sometimes the only way anybody can get any point across. Now, historically, we have also learned to pick and choose which fights we demonize and which fights we celebrate. I recommend you to pay attention to what you look to demonize. Pay attention to what you look to demonize. When it was the American Revolution or the Boston Tea Party, it was deemed patriotic and a hard-fought battle for freedom. However, black people who have lived in a state of being lesser than for over 400 years in the United States of America are expected to shut up, get over it, and live life as usual. That simply will not work. Put yourself in their shoes and look at things from their perspective. For over 400 years, they have been oppressed, violent acts have been used against them, and their loved ones have been taken away from them in the name of slavery, in the name of justice, in the name of wrongful accusations, which we've seen plenty. Now, this simply will not work. It is not sustainable, it is not moral, and it is not ethical. Full stop. Now, there's something that all of us need to understand. The functionality of our society is upheld by a contract signed by the government and its people. This contract highlights certain societal norms both parties have agreed to live by. However, people in color in those United States of America see the contract they signed being delegitimized by the government, by the people in power, and even by their fellow privileged neighbors. And no, I agree, looting, rioting, property damage is not ideal. But there is nothing ideal when it comes to the removal of a systematic boot from your neck. At the end of the day, removal of oppressive authority is way more important than the destruction of property. If, in the expression of black people's anguish at their state-sanctioned execution, your concern is how some corporations get affected, you're seriously missing the point. I'm gonna end this with a saying by Will Smith, which I think really resonates with what I'm saying here. He said, "Racism is not increasing, it is being filmed." Racism is not increasing, it is being filmed.